There we go.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the last QualLab lunch of the semester. We're so glad you're here. And in a second, I will have my colleague introduce himself, who will introduce our main speaker, which I'm excited about for today. So my name is Dr. Penny Pasquay. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am a professor in the Higher Ed and Student Affairs program, and also the director of the QualLab. So we are just have a slate of wonderful QualLab lunches for you to really engage in the conversation. I think today will be very exciting. So thank you very much. Bakari, do you want to?
And I am Bakari Lumumba. I am the QualLab GRA, and I will be co-hosting our final QualLab lunch talk of the semester.
So a little bit about housekeeping. We love if your videos are on, but of course you may be eating lunch and it's fine if your videos are off, no problem. This is being recorded, so we will make sure to post it on our website, on our dashboard of resources. We also have resources up there about narrative inquiry and grounded theory and how to do a focus group and different sessions that we've done. So you can see a lot of resources there. The video for this talk will also be added to the dashboard of resources. If you need closed captioning, let us know. And then also other events are at these websites on at the college. So Lunch and Learn, the next slide, is about our outline for today. So this is obviously the welcome and an introduction. I also wanted to share that in January, we will have a session on really thinking through some of the things with discourse analysis from feminist and post-structural perspectives. So that's January 27th. I'll put the link in the chat, and that way you can join us there with Dr. Susan Iverson and Dr. Elizabeth Allen. So we hope you attend there. So I'm going to turn it over now to Bakari to introduce our main speaker.
Thank you so much, Penny. So I will be introducing Dr. Nimo Abdi. She is an assistant professor in multicultural and equity studies in education in the Department of Teaching and Learning at the Ohio State University. Prior to joining Ohio State, Dr. Abdi was an assistant professor of culture and teaching at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. She advised and mentored more than 20 undergraduate and graduate students, and she served as a postdoctoral associate there for 2 years before joining the faculty. With a bachelor's degree in microbiology from Ohio State in 2004, Dr. Abdi first worked as a research associate in Ohio State's Department of Microbiology. Later, she served as an elementary math teacher in Atlanta, Georgia, and as a graduate research assistant and teaching assistant in Michigan State University's College of Education, where she earned her PhD in 2015. Dr. Abdi studies education as a cultural phenomenon and seeks to understand how factors such as race, religion, gender, and class affect immigrant and refugee education. She has contributed to 5 books and has published 6 referred journal articles, with more underway. Her current project focuses on Somali immigrant communities in Columbus and how local schools negotiate race and religion. Without further ado, please help me. Please give a virtual round of applause to Dr. Nimo Abdi.
Thank you, Bakari. That's very humbling. As you can see, I still have a lot of work to do, but thank you anyway. I'm happy to be here today. When I spoke with Penny back about a year ago now, when we first came to Ohio State, and she was telling me about the QualLab, and I was like, yay, I want to join that. You know, it sounded a cool space, right? Where graduate students come and workshop their ideas. And I was like, yeah, I would be interested in that. But then I found out yesterday, there's a lot of people like today. I was like, what? I thought I was just gonna come and share some stories. So I thank you, and I'm happy to be here today. What I would like to do is, I don't have a whole lot of time. What I want to do is I just want to share my story about how I came to phenomenology as a graduate student, and the kind of things I've pumped into along the way, and things that are still I'm thinking through. And I do this because I know many of you are graduate students, and I just want to demystify this whole process of, methodology, reading philosophy texts, and that sort of thing. So Yeah, so here it goes. Let me share my screen. All right. So why phenomenology, right? So when I was in graduate school, as most graduate students do, in my third year of, when I finished all of my qualitative, what I thought I was done qualitative study courses, and I had this like amazing in-depth ethnography. I just finished ethnography course. And I went to do my, I came to Columbus again to do my pilot study for my PhD. Actually, I was in a school, in an urban school in the West Side, which is part of Columbus Public. And I realized they had a good number of Somali students. I would say about maybe 10 to 15% of the school population were Somali Bantu students. And there were a couple of school staff that were Somali, and then one Somali teacher. So having conversations with those people and other immigrant children, I realized, you know, my little questionnaire I brought with me, the students just ignored it, and they just want to talk about their experiences. And some of them actually use the term lived experience. So at that point, I knew I needed to perhaps learn more about the notion of experience as an abstract, right? And then work my way to understanding what does that mean in terms of negotiating identities. So basically, I realized I didn't know as much I thought I knew. So I went back to school. I went back to campus on the fall, and I enrolled myself in the Phenomenology seminar that was taught by Kyle Greenwald at Michigan State, which I loved it, because phenomenology, all of a sudden, I thought I found something that I can grab onto, unlike ethnography. And it spoke to me because phenomenology attended to the world in a way other methodologies did not. It was exciting as somebody who grew up in a Somali oral tradition where the animals, the plants, and other things interacted with human like these. I grew up with these stories, right? So the human is not the center in the traditions I come from. The human is just a part of a whole array of other entities that are in cosmologies, right? So phenomenology, I found, oh, wow, this is, okay, this idea of opening yourself up to phenomena and opening yourself up to the world sounded very exciting. And I was like, okay, this is good. But then I realized, you know, as I started doing my dissertation, it was not answering some of the things I wanted to do for me. Because as we all know, methods and methodologies do not happen in vacuum, right? So they are part of epistemologies and ontologies and traditions and historical processes that are the people, these are just tools, right? So because of my excitement at the time, I forgot those tenets. I was like, wait a minute, you know, now, you know, these are just tools and they're coming from a particular historical perspectives. That's why they're not doing what they're supposed to do, right? And then you have this whole, you know, reading Gadamer, I found out, you know, the controversial history of Gadamer during the Nazis and all of these things. So that's a different story. And then moving forward, you know, one text I really read a lot and read very closely was Merleau-Ponty's Phenomenology of Perception. And this is where I was having issues, because Merleau-Ponty talks about this idea that, you know, opening yourself up to the world and being, you know, being in sync with everything that is happening. I was like, wait a minute. That's what I mean, this is not something new for a lot of people of color and marginalized communities. We're constantly aware of our bodies in space and in time, right? Because of, you know, experiences of colonization and that sort of thing. And I was, so understanding Merleau-Ponty in his own context versus Frantz Fanon, right? So then I knew, following certain traditions, because there are so many different phenomenologies, right? There's an interpretive phenomenology, there's a descriptive phenomenology, there's a hermeneutic, and all of these things. Then I started reading scholars of color. I came back to Kyle and I said, Kyle, this is not doing what I thought it's going to do for me. So he's like, why don't you check at Linda Alcott's work? So I checked Linda, and I found a whole array of scholars of color writing about race, like Gordon Lewis. Of course, Frantz Fanon, I've known him, but I didn't know him as a phenomenologist. So he was the founder of Phenomenology of Race. And then that was helpful, because now I could read these scholars of color who are writing actually about racial experiences and racialization within the phenomenological context. And so that's one thing. And then, there are more contemporary people who are actually paying a lot of attention to context, and people like Mark Vagley at the University of Minnesota. And Vagley argues that sort of speaks to how context both produces and shapes phenomena. The idea that we cannot just take phenomena out of, like an abstract thing, but because people live through phenomena, right? So then how does the context and the historical processes, legacies of colonization, those kind of things actually are constantly impacting? So you can detect a little bit of post-structural, not a little bit, quite a bit actually, post-structuralism in Vagley's post-intentional phenomenology. And this kind of opens, for me at least, it opens up phenomenology to a whole array of critical phenomenology and work that happens in the margins. So let me, I'm going to come back to that previous slide. So here, at least as far as I understand phenomenology, critical phenomenology and PIP, post-intentional phenomenology, are kind of doing similar thing, even though Vagley, I have attended a lot of his critical reading groups, and I was part of the PIP at the University of Minnesota, and there's a lot of emphasis on, like writing and reflection and that sort of thing. And when you're doing research with, I don't want to use the word tradition, but when you're doing research with communities who rely on oral literacy, you need to kind of be smart about what kind of methods you want to use, right? So there's always, that's why I'm saying, working from the margins of the field is what I find other people who are doing critical phenomenology are doing. Mind you, these critical phenomenology scholars that I listed are all trained as philosophers. So it's not like they come to, education journals and tell us how to do phenomenology, right? What else? So currently, what I'm thinking about is like, yes, we need to open up phenomenology by looking at, context, by looking at, by also paying attention to, okay, so what then, because the work I do, I want the work to do something, right? So I'm interested in decolonial theory. I'm interested in anti-colonial methodologies. I'm not just interested in description of phenomena. I want to know how the people I work in the community actually not only negotiate, but how they impact the phenomena itself. So I always say, we are the least theoreticians, academics, because the people who really out, in communities, they are the real theoreticians, right? We rely on reading what other people tell us, but they actually figure things out, they stumble upon things, and they just, they walk through the world and they work through the world. And that's, I think those spaces have a lot of things for us academics that we can learn from. And then, so context matters, but then what? So I am at this third point right now, like what about liberatory practices within the phenomenology field? And there is a lot of, there's a new emergence of this like new materialism where, people are saying, oh, we human beings, yes, we are part of larger world, but we don't really matter as much as we think we are. And my issue with that is, if you come from a dominant power positions, those are good. I mean, it's a good thing to be aware of, but people who are in colonized communities, that's not helpful. We are finally, a lot of scholars of color are finally getting their work out, and we're trying to do work in communities. And all of a sudden that now we found our voice, it's not helpful for us to say, okay, I don't matter. Let's focus on theorizing how this table probably it takes up space, right? Or what is the table doing? I'm not interested in the table. I'm interested in the kids in the classroom. I'm interested in the mothers who are trying to talk to the school principals, right? So that's what I mean. What about liberatory practices? What can phenomenology teach us in terms of the things that really matter, right? And also, another thing I have been thinking a lot about recently is how can we understand non-Western epistemologies and ontologies? Oops, I think this is just saying epistemologies and ontologies, like people who come from non-Western traditions. How can we not capture, but how can we understand their context and in a phenomenological way? How can we describe phenomena and kind of follow phenomena, right? If we don't know, like if, let's say, for example, I have this Somali Mothers Project, and if a mother comes to the school and is sharing something with the school principal, if the school principal is not understanding where this woman is coming from and some of the things, then just describing the phenomena is not helpful. We need to understand the things that frame other traditions. I don't know, I feel like I'm just coming back in circles. And then I have been also doing a lot of historical reading about issues that I'm interested, like mothering and that sort of thing. And then the question is how historical processes actually shape phenomena and the way we experience phenomena in the world. So that is, how am I doing time, Bakari? We're good. Okay, that's all I have.
Yay! Oh, thank you. I know Bakari has questions in the chat, and I appreciate. I just have to, echo or magnify. I appreciate what you just said about the historical matters. It connects with the contemporary, and both together are so vital. Instead of just abandoning our knowledge of the historical, I just thank you for that. Bakari, there's, I know, question, at least one question in the chat. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is a question from Sharon. She states, what is the distinction between phenomenology and critical phenomenology, and how is that linked to post-structuralism?
Thank you. That's, I'm gonna get out of that screen. That's a loaded question. Thank you for asking. So in my understanding, critical phenomenology is phenomenology that looks at the experiences and the work of marginalized and colonized people and the scholars who are writing within that realm, right? Phenomenology has many, many different fields. So then the question is, which kind of phenomenology are we comparing critical phenomenology to? And people who are writing feminist work, race work, mostly those two are naming themselves critical phenomenologists. So, and then post-structuralism, I think post-structuralism is constantly shaping how people are making sense. Like Mark Bagley talks about, he uses a lot of Deleuze work and Guattari and this idea of phenomena, the fleets, right? The phenomena is always fleeting, right? And following the phenomena around. So when I said methodology, one of those slides I had, methodology is both an orientation and a practice. So that means you are constantly engaging the phenomena. And once you become aware of the phenomena, it's really difficult to get away from it. So in my mother work, in my Somali Mothers Project, I'm constantly, my family say, look, my sisters and other women in my family are like, can you just stop, asking all these questions? So I say that to say, post-structuralism is a very important foundation in critical phenomenology. And I think sometimes the boundaries become a little bit, unclear. Again, all of these things are, doing this, right? It's difficult to say this is this and this is that, at least in my reading of these texts. So I hope that answered the question.
Wonderful. So we have another question, and that is, can you name some of the Black scholars that work in phenomenology that you've read?
Yes, definitely. I love the work of Lewis Gorton, George Yancey is another one. Linda Martin Alcoff is another one. Sarah Ahmed is an awesome scholar. I love her work. And let me see. Those are some I can think of right now. If I remember, I'll share more.
Okay. Very good, very good. See, we got some more questions here.
Jennifer asked a question right above the one from Brandon that you just read.
Yes.
About
what does PIP stand for? You talked about photoground for thought and action. What does PIP stand for?
So PIP stands, or as Mark Bagley calls it, PIP, it stands for post-intentional phenomenology. And this is a methodology that acknowledges the way the context shapes the phenomena. So in the earlier, I would say, in the earlier phenomenologists, and even more contemporary phenomenologists who are interested in lived experience, like Van Manen, those people, and what's this other lady's name, the Swedish, Dahlberg. So those people are interested in, they're interested in the lived experiences in a way. Van Manen talks a lot about the essential themes, right? The essential themes that can come up from the phenomena. And Mark is saying, look, these essential themes are never constant. They're constantly changing because of the context, time, space, all of these things. And so that kind of, I think Bagley, he himself says that he's working from the edges of these traditions because he doesn't really fit into the interpretives versus the descriptive phenomenology.
Very good, very good. So we have a question from one of our faculty members here at Ohio State, Dr. Timothy San Pedro. Thanks for joining us, Dr. San Pedro. So he asked, how do phenomenologies interact with one another? In other words, what is the role of the research in relation to those they work with? How are researchers positioned in this work? He hopes this makes sense. So if you need me to reread it, I will. But how do phenomenologies interact with one another? In other words, what is the role of the research in relation to those they work with?
That is a really good question, Dr. Sanpedro. Thank you. And I understand as somebody who works also in community spaces. And yeah, so phenomenologies should be interacting. Not only should they be following the phenomena, but they should be also doing a lot of reflections. And reflexivity is huge in phenomenological writings because not only the context impacts or shapes the phenomena, but also our reading of the literature shapes the phenomena and how we think about it. Mark Bagley talks about post-reflection in the field. So that what that means is that you constantly, so everything becomes data in phenomenology. The reading becomes data, and then your reflection on the reading of the literature becomes data. The interaction with the participants becomes data, and your post-reflection of that becomes data. And then, of course, the interviews and the focus groups. So phenomenology kind of absorbs other methods. So you can do ethnographic methods and focus groups and all of these other things, right? We use. And so I don't know about other phenomenologists, but this is where I lean on indigenous methodology in terms of the commitments that ground the work when you work in communities. And what that means is that, are we doing the work that the community wants to do? Because at the end of the day, let's be honest, all of us, we we try to impact the world, but we actually writing for other academics, right? So mostly the community knows their lives. It's us trying to understand and explain maybe to other people. For example, for immigrant scholars like me, I work with the community I come from. So then the thing is, I'm trying to explain my community to the field, right? And I don't know, Tim, if that answers your question, but those are some of the things I have been kind of reflecting on. And that's why I shared, the idea of what about liberation? What about social change in terms of doing phenomenology? Shall we just stop describing the phenomena and interpreting it, or is there more?
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. So we have another question from Miss Thomas. She I'm going to say, Miss, I don't want to butcher her first name, so please forgive me. This is, can you share some of your work with interpretive phenomenology?
In terms of what? Like how I use it, or how I am?
She does not state. If you are there, maybe you could unmute. Yes, she says yes, yes. And in terms of how you use it.
Okay, so that's yeah. So when I was doing my dissertation, I used interpretive phenomenology because Mark Bagley's book came out the year that year when I finished my dissertation. So I didn't know. I was like, I wish I had known this work, and I struggled because Van Manen was trying to. I used a lot of Van Manen and Dahlberg, and they were trying just to stay within the boundaries, like the phenomenon, right? And not the context. So I tried to do that in my dissertation, and that's why I have been, I said that I realized interpretive phenomenology was not doing what I wanted to do. So basically what you're trying to do is trying to use, to kind of bound, Dahlberg talks about brittling, which means, traditional phenomenology, what they did, this idea of bracketing. So Husserl and earlier interpretive phenomenologists talked a lot about, this idea of bracketing your experience and just focusing, and that's impossible, right? We all know that. We know that from feminist theory. We know that from post-structuralists. We know the context matter. We know that human beings who are interacting with the phenomena matters. And so there's no way we can bracket. But then, then I turned to Dahlberg, and Dahlberg talks about this idea of going back and forth between, the reflections. She says, you don't want to bring too much knowledge to the phenomena, then you mess it up, right? And I'm thinking, okay, how's that possible? So that's why I found post-intentional phenomenology, Mark Bagley's work, really helpful, because it kind of opens up all of that. It's difficult to stay, especially if you have done reading around feminist work, if you've done a lot of reading around post-structural theorists, you are constantly aware of the context you're working in, right? And you can't be just talking about essential themes as some of the interpretive phenomenologists do. I hope that answered the question.
Yes. I believe it did. So we have another question, or we got quite a few coming in. Hold on, I got to back up a little bit. Make sure we get everyone in. Let me see here. Yes, here's a question from Barbara. What are some of the main validity threats you experienced more often in your phenomenological studies, and how do you deal with those threats?
So that's a really good question, and this is something I got a review recently back. They didn't use the word validities, but they kind of alluded to it, right? So Bagley has a good piece about validity. You can Google him, but basically the idea is that if you stay, if you constantly, so Dahlberg talks about this idea in relation to validity. So we all know that as qualitative scholars, we struggle with this question, right? Because it's a quantitative, it's rooted in quantitative traditions. Nevertheless, right? Dalberg talks about this idea that we have to constantly engage the phenomena. So engaging the phenomena and constantly working anything, and as Wagner would say, not only engaging, but constantly being aware of the other forces that are working on the phenomena, that kind of addresses the questions of validity. And here, I'm not a phenomenologist or a methodologist in training, but this is the way. So basically in my work, I try to make the stories of my participants very, very potent. And when they came back with the review, I said, this is how I'm addressing these. So then they said, okay, can you add more, can you usher more data into the paper, which I did. So I think that kind of showed the reviewers, at least, you know, there is more into this. So again, when earlier I said phenomenology kind of absorbs other methods. So I also use storytelling with phenomenology. And that way you can kind of work your way through about these issues, about validity and what have you.
Okay, very good. Thanks for that, Dr. Sanpedro. He requested that we stop the share so that he could see you better. And of course, now we can see the whole community. Just want to say thank you once again, everyone, for coming out and being part of the QualLab lunch talk, right? So make sure you give yourselves a virtual round of applause for sharing your Thursday lunch hour with us here on December 2nd. So we have another question from a CJ Venerable. He asks, what advice do you have to folks who feel insufficiently phenomenological in our writing? Max Van Manen talks about phenomenology as a poetizing activity, but I feel like I'm working against years of disciplining into a more traditional style of qualitative writing, more analytical, less interpretive, more attentive to concreteness than evoking sensorial details.
That's a really good question, and I agree with you. Thank you for sharing that. That's why I was saying earlier, you know, those were some of the things I was kind of working through. I was realizing even in you know, in my experience with PIP groups and things of that nature, there's a lot of emphasis on writing, and poetically, the better you can write, the more you can, you know, whatever, describe the phenomena. And when you're working with, some of us come from traditions where the print literacy is not the way that knowledge works, right? And you're working with participants who are in that community, then you want to move away from this poetic writing, right? And that's why, you know, I say I find storytelling really, really helpful, and as a methods that you can use within phenomenology. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that is a frustration, especially for me, somebody who is English is not my first language, and I was not educated in English in my formative years, and you know, I'm coming from a science background, all of these things. The level of text that somebody like me can produce can never match up to the poetic writings of Van Manen's, you know, like, at least that's my view, right? So if you're using post-intentional phenomenology, or even if you look at the works of George Yancey and they're beautiful writings, but, you know, the writings are different. So my answer to that is just, you know, look what works for you and make it work it. Knowing, you know, the community you're working with is also important, so.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Look, we might have a future phenomenologist in the making, according to Dr. Sanpedro. Very good. So we have another question from Sharon. She asks, can you give a specific example of engaging with the phenomena, something that you have done and what that looks like? So engaging with the phenomena, this is something that we hear about a lot, but for some people, they may not understand what that actually means.
Okay, so thank you. I'm gonna share a story. So a few years ago, I went to do some data collection in in London, the United Kingdom. And when we got there, we were interested in, the school invited us to do interview with Somali students. They had a large Somali population. So when we got there, there was a group of mothers who wanted to talk to me. And they, told the school administrators, we want to talk with the whatever research is coming and give us a time slot in her schedule. So, and that I think is the perfect example of a phenomena, right? So since then, my work actually shifted from student identities into the Somali mothering practices and Somali mothers' engagement with schools. So what happened there, the mothers, they invited me, they had conversations, they told me what their struggles were, they invited me to their homes, and we have been in contact since. So to use Van Manen's words, the phenomena just, it presented, Marley Ponte would say, the phenomena presented itself to me. This idea of the phenomena of Somali mothering just happened. So it presented itself and I had to do something about it. So I think that is engaging the phenomena. And then the other thing that came out of that work was I had to really pause and think about, it would have been a very simple thing to say, oh, these immigrant mothers are negotiating school involvement with the school, and they come from, they challenging the school norms of what parent-school involvement means. That would have been a very, very, I don't want to say simple, but where most of us stop, right? Not knowing how these women understood themselves, right? So then that made me think about, okay, wait, I'm a Somali woman, I'm a Somali mother. Some of the things they were sharing, I knew it was much deeper than, a biological relationship with children. So what I did then is I actually I did more research on African women and African motherhood and that sort of thing, and kind of showing this idea that, the African mother, the way African women understand their motherhood is very different than the way the school understood. And then also the historical lens of what mothering means in Western context, and how the state infringes upon that relationship between mother, basically kind of surveilling, right? So all of these things came out because of these, the phenomena, right, if you will, right, presented itself, this idea of Somali women, Somali mothers negotiating a school involvement, so.
Very good, very good. So we have another question from Barbara once again. She stated that earlier she asked two questions. One, as you engage in critical phenomenology, you obviously touch on emotions from those lived experiences that you're researching. She says, one, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with touching on the emotions from lived experience? And two, how do you manage to stay out of the emotions, if you do, to manage your own emotions and stay focused on the research?
If you find how to do that, let me know. It's very difficult to do that, right? To be honest, especially if you are a person of color, you can't go in and out of the work. The work is you, and once you turn that on, it's hard to. I understand the need to do that, and I don't know how to do it, but the emotions. So the emotions are important, right? So I also turn into a lot of Black feminist thought, and that helps me think through some of the, some of those things, right? So I'm very big fan of Patricia Collins' work and other Black feminist thought, and in relation to mothering again, right? So I don't know, but in phenomenology, the emotions are part of the phenomena. So you have to really, once something happens in the field or you feel a certain way about the phenomena, then we, as a phenomenologist, you need to pause and pay very close attention to that. And I think that's what I have been doing from the first time I started doing my pilot study, because I could have just said, oh, I'm seeing everything the immigrant literature says here in this school, and that's it. But I wanted to understand something else, because there was a lot of emotions that the stories those kids shared, and the way they talked about their experiences was very powerful. And I needed to know. I need to go and do more reading and more studying about what this thing is.
Very good, very good. Well, I don't think we have any more questions in the chat, but if we have time, maybe we can open up for a little bit and maybe have some people have a virtual community, and maybe people can ask me questions one-on-one verbally if they turn their screens on.
Dr. Abdi, are there places where people can read your research on the work that you've done that you're sharing today? Or if there are, after this, would you be willing to share it with Bakari and me, and we can put it up online along with the material, the video, so that people can take a look at some of your work?
Okay, I'll share with you. I have a recent article about that came out, EAQ, that is Education Administration Quarterly, and that talks about this project. Is one of the pieces I wrote about this Somali mothers in the UK. And then I have an earlier piece from last year that is about experiences, how Somali immigrants experience, not only experience, but negotiate whiteness, like racialization and race, right? In a white supremacy context. And that is in Qualitative Studies in Education. But I can share both titles with you after the meeting.
So I know there's a couple people who have published on phenomenology in this space. I also don't want to call you out either. I know also some graduate students are in this space that have been looking at PIP, the post-intentional phenomenology. And so if we have a little time, if you'd be willing to answer, there was a question earlier, how do you use phenomenology in a study that you have engaged in? And if you would be willing to share, we would welcome that as well as a space for learning and engaging with each other's work. If you're not comfortable sharing verbally, please put it in the chat. We want to support everybody's work here, Dr. Abdi's, as well as all your work on phenomenology. So I know I'm posting some of these resources, but if you all have them, please add it as well.
I'm wondering, what were some of the challenges? I know you mentioned you used interpretive in your dissertation, and I'm using IPA, and I wanted to know how you were able to defend the idea of not bracketing. I mean, I know there needs to be some bracketing, of course, but I'm finding it difficult to pull literature on, I mean, Herschel is boss, of course, but there are others who have stemmed from him, and I'm looking at others that are not so fixed on the concept of bracketing. And I need to be able, I want to be stronger in that area. And so do you have suggested reading, or what was your personal experience? Did you come from a situation or institution that if you were going to use phenomenology, it had to be bracketing throughout the entire thing? I could be a participant in my own study. And so the concept of, bracketing myself out, other than, making a whole separate chapter on me, how do I do that? I love IPA. I love the data that's emerging from, I'm in chapter 4 now. And so, but you can't eat, you know, sometimes even a journal, researcher journal, you can't just stuff it all in there. And so what was your experience in dealing with that?
Thank you, Dorothea. I would say at this stage, if you're writing your chapter 4,
well,
I would
going
look
through my analysis right now, you know, I'm manually transcribing my interviews and other data that were collected. And so even though it's lengthy, it's very deep and I just love it. But
did you read Dahlberg's work, The Life World? I think that's some of the title of her book. And then she had several articles.
Yeah, I wrote his name down as you were speaking because I read some of it, but not, you know, but not as much as I'm inspired by you to read right now. Smith, I read a lot of Smith, and oh, not Herschel, but I'm sorry, I can't call the name right now.
Yeah, Husserl. Read Dahlberg, The Life World, I think that's what it's called. I have it somewhere here.
Okay.
And she talks about this idea of brittling, right? So the story goes, I think she has a horse ranch somewhere in North Europe. I think she's a Swedish, I forget, she's Swedish or Norwegian, anyhow. So the idea that, you know, you're going back and forth, when she's riding her horse, she was thinking about this idea, the phenomena doesn't exist in vacuum, the phenomena exists in the world, right? So there's no way you can bracket. And this is the whole idea of, you know, post-structuralism that tells us, you know, everything impacts everything else. We can't just say, you know, we can't fossilize experience, right? Even our interpretation of experience changes as, if you read something now, it comes back. So that's why I was saying everything becomes a data in the more contemporary phenomenologists, right? Like Wagley's work. So I would suggest, if you are proud of your study, first I would suggest to read Dahlberg and see if that speaks to you. And then Wagley treats your reflection as part of the data. And I think that would have been really helpful to you, but I don't know at this stage in your work if that is feasible. The other thing you asked earlier was the support, or maybe the challenge of these different thoughts of phenomenologists. So the first person I studied with phenomenology followed strictly Van Manen. Okay. And even though I was frustrated at times, I learned a lot from that, right? And he suggested I should read Linda Martin Alcoff's work. And Linda also works within the interpretive, right? Interpretive framework, interpretive phenomenology. So, but she pays a lot of attention to how experiences accumulate on our bodies. So this idea that, you know, our bodies become this vessel of accumulating experiences. And I relied heavily my dissertation on her writings. So, you know, the thing is, we can capture everything in every work we do. We just have to find ways to make some of the connections we're trying to make clearer, right? And Mark Wagley says that, you know, I don't care about, because we used to often think together in the reading group that, you know, all these, because these are really big things. People fight over that, you know, Van Manen, you know, wrote a response to this and to that. So people feel strong about these topics. And, you know, I think it helps if you just see them as tools. Yes, phenomenology is much bigger than that. It's an orientation, it's a practice. We get it, right? And once you become aware of the phenomena, you're in it, you can never get out, right? I love all of that, right? But at the same time, you want also to do things for you, right, as tools. And Mark often says, you know, I don't care about all the, you know, a curse word, like all the drama that is happening. I just want to get things done. So if we want to get things done, then I think, you know, it's helpful to find, and look, the person you're working with, tell them you're using this kind of phenomenology and then see what happens. But I think probably Dahlberg is a good place to start, and then work your way. And then, you know, your dissertation is not your last work, right?
Yes.
So you can write this now, and then you can continue to evolve and learn and experiment. I don't know if that's helpful to you.
Thank you so much. That is incredibly helpful. Yes, I feel understood. Thank you. I have some direction now. I appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. You're welcome.
So we have a question from Lauren. Would you like for me to read your question, Lauren, or would you like to articulate it yourself?
I could read it. That's fine. Thank you. So I guess I'll just kind of read off the chat. So I was wondering what your approach to data analysis is using post-intentional phenomenology. Kind of a background is that this is kind of the direction I'm going with my dissertation right now. So I was kind of, I'm interested in staying as close as possible to participants' own words from their experiences. But then kind of struggling about just how to do data analysis. I feel like it's very heavily focused on coding a lot, which fits nicely with grounded theory. But I was just wondering if you had advice on how to do data analysis within post-intentional phenomenology.
I think that's it's really fun to, it wasn't always fun. It was frustrating at the beginning, but post-intentional phenomenology allows, I think, or opens up this, you know, if let's say you take an excerpt from your data, for example, right? So then you write a reflection on what you think the data is saying to you, right? And then you write another reflection on the data in conjunction with the literature you read, right? That's a different reflection. And then you start, you know, if you do the let's say themes, just for clarity's reason, if you pull those themes and you work your way back and forth like that, because Wagner says, don't do all of your literature review at one time or at the beginning before you do that. You have to do a little bit of it, right? This goes back to Dahlberg's idea that you don't want to know too much about the phenomena. Of course, too much about the phenomena of other people's experiences, not of your participants, right? So what that means is you need to be constantly working between all these multiple pieces, which becomes challenging at dissertation stage, right? So I've seen dissertation, post-intentional dissertations that used art-based post-intentional phenomenology. I've seen kind of the traditional focus group or interviews and all of that. And there's a lot of reflection in those dissertations, and the data kind of at some times you feel like the data is kind of fading to the background. And that's why I'm saying people who are writing in colonized communities, that becomes a little bit of a challenge for us, because we want to center the stories of our participants, or we want to center the experiences of those marginalized experiences. And then, you know, you just have to make a decision. Am I going to stick to PIP all the way through, or am I going to venture out and use PIP, minimize PIP as a tool, and venture out to other like indigenous methodologies or Black feminist, I don't know if there's a Black feminist thought, I have no idea, but Black feminist writings, right? So I don't know.
I can make a suggestion there. There's a new methodology about Black women methodology and intersectionality by Shayla Haynes and a number of scholars, including Lori Patton Davis. So I'll just give their work a shout out that might fit as a connection there with PIP, if you're doing some intentional connections.
Very good, very good. I think we have about time for one more question. If anyone has one last question. So I would ask a question, Dr. Abdi. So my question is, in the research that you're doing, you said it's more community-based. You're really trying to write for the community and in terms of sharing that with the academia. But how does your research benefit the community?
That's a paper. That's a very good question. That's a question I struggle with. So one of the recent pieces I submitted and it got rejected, so I'm working on it again now, is I actually made the premise, like I said, look, this work is A, for scholars, and B, for the community. And I said that because I was sharing some things that I wanted to second gen and 1.5 generation Somali mothers to kind of think about and start conversations around issues of tradition and that sort of thing. So that's a way I think my work can be helpful by writing to, so working between the first generation immigrant folk or elders in the community and the younger people, right? So contextualizing stories, because we all know as people of color, our children, when they go to school, we are taught. I didn't go to school here, but I have siblings and other relatives and friends, and my kids in school now. Like immigrant children are taught, like all other marginalized groups are taught, not to value the knowledges they come from and their ancestral knowledge, right? So as young immigrant people, things that happens in the house, the way the relationships happen between parents and children are not often, I don't want to use the word value, like they don't often see. Sometimes some of the women in my studies would say, oh, now I understand my mother better, right? But there's this idea, because the schools, the institutions, everything is working against the parents, right? So what I'm trying now to do in some of the work I'm engaged in, to say this work is also for the community, it's also for the younger folk, because look, this is where these are the traditions that your mother is kind of drawing from, or when she tells you don't do that or do this, these are the things, like these are the frameworks that she's and then I have this conversation with a lot of younger women who are much younger than me, who are, you know, second generation and what have you, and they're like, oh, that makes sense, or you know, now I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it. And then also highlighting where the harm is coming from sometimes is helpful, right, for these young people to see, because just because your mother does not speak fluent English, that doesn't mean she doesn't know anything, or just your mother doesn't have a formal education, doesn't mean she doesn't know. She does. Some of these women are brilliant. They're far more smarter than most of us here with PhDs, right? So making those stories visible to the younger generation, I think, is one way I can serve.
Wonderful. Thank you very much once again for answering that question. I'm going to turn things back over to Dr. Pasquay.
Thank you so much. We're so lucky to have you. I had mentioned to you, Dr. Abdi, you have an open invitation to teach phenomenology in ed studies. I know you usually teach with TNL, so they might want you over there, of course. But in the College of Education and Human Ecology here, we don't have a lot of phenomenologists who are faculty. And so I think we're just so lucky to have you as one of our faculty here, and look forward to engaging with you more and more. For the next session, you can see it up in the chat with Dr. Susan Iverson and Dr. Elizabeth Ellen on policy discourse analysis from feminist post-structural perspectives, as well as, let's all give Dr. Abdi a round of applause virtually. Thank you so much. I just feel like we have so much knowledge and so many more readings to really dive into this. And I thank you all who are participating or watching this later for the work that you do. This is such important work. We need this to change the field, to change how research is done and keep pushing on methodologies and research approaches. So we need you to do this important work. So thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.